In this video essay, first we will cover the general symbolism of Purva Ashadha, and then we will explore the general personality of the natives of this asterism. Timestamps will be provided that separate these two major sections. The Ashadhas together relate to the concept of overcoming, but specifically they relate to overcoming our base desires and transforming them. One sees this first in that Purva Ashadha occurs within Sagittarius, the first sign that marks our departure from the social and carnal worlds and begins our journey to the abstract and spiritual worlds. In Mula, we experience a sort of existential crisis, a realization of the ultimate superficiality of the material plane, and this results in a sort of nihilism. But despite this realization, we still suffer from attachments to desire, particularly carnal desire, which keeps us bound to the material plane. The Ashadhas each have their own way of dealing with the problem of desire, with Purva Ashadha being the path of satiation, whereas Uttara Ashadha is the path of renunciation. Purva Ashadha relates to satiation, owing of course to its goddess, the goddess of the waters and ultimate nourishments, Apas. Apas is the goddess of all forms of waters, from lakes to rivers to the ocean itself, as she is the principle of the elements, and her together with her consort Varuna ruled the elements. When you crave something very badly, there are only two ways of ridding yourself of the pangs of that craving. It is either you feed it, that is, satiate it, or teach yourself how to let go of it, that is, renounce it. Purva Ashadha, relating to the path of satiation, understands how to feed desire intelligently, in such a way as to provoke a distaste for cravings in general. One way of doing this is by offering us ever more excellent meals. In this way, we inch away further and further from the mundanity of the material plane. For example, let us say you are hungry, and for most of your life you've only had access to one type of food. Perhaps it is a common vegetable available in your area. Now let's say one day someone offers you a quote-unquote superior piece of food, like a special type of meat like Wagyu beef, or something that isn't immediately available in your area. You taste the Wagyu beef and you become obsessed with it, to such an extent that you feel disgusted of the quote-unquote lesser vegetables that you had eaten before. So for the next months or years, your favorite food becomes the Wagyu beef, and you shun the vegetables that make up 50% of what is available in your area. But then one day you taste an even superior piece of food. For the sake of this example, let us say it's sushi. Now sushi becomes the most excellent food you've ever tasted, to such an extent that you now look down upon not only vegetables, but also meats. This contempt for the quote-unquote lesser foods is so extreme that you would even rather go hungry than to debase yourself by eating lesser foods. Let us say this process continues, of you tasting ever greater, ever more exquisite pieces of food, until eventually the entire earthly realm becomes repulsive to you, because nothing around it is gratifying anymore. You continue tasting ever higher, ever more exquisite, ever more refined morsels until 99% of the world below you becomes almost disgusting. Recognize the irony in this example. It is by use of sensuality that we have effectively destroyed sensuality. Effectively, we have destroyed this individual's taste for the material world by use of the very material world itself. Sensuality defeated by sensuality. Desire defeated through its own satiation. Of course, I use the example of food because food goes into the tongue and palates, and the element of the palate is the water elements. And so Purva Ashadha makes use of sensuality to pull one into spirituality, by having one, step by step, taste of the most excellent things to such an extent that one develops a contempt for anything lesser, making detachments easier. The method employed in Purva Ashadha to help the individual in detaching himself from the material plane is specifically by blessing him with each and every single one of his wishes, so that he feels accomplished, and then from the reclined position of the satiated, he lets go of it without struggle. Let us consider more deeply this nakshatra's relationship to satiation. The goddess Apas is the wife of Varuna and is often referred to as Varuni, the goddess of wine. Water, milk, and wine are often seen as the three liquids or libations that satiate man. Varuni was born from the churning of the oceans along with other gods and goddesses related to nourishments, satisfaction, and ultimate satiation. She was born with Chandra, the moon, Lakshmi, who is often referred to as the goddess of wealth, but in truth she is a goddess of satiation. Varuni was also born with the sacred elephant Airavata, who is Indra's mount, and elephants in general are related to ultimate satiation, as mystically they gathered the waters from the heavenly clouds and rained them on earth. Varuni was also born from the churning of the oceans with Kamadhenu, who is the wish-fulfilling cow, and also Kalpavrishka, which is the wish-fulfilling tree. Then, of course, the very Apsaras themselves, the heavenly nymphs, were also born from the churning of the ocean, and these nymphs succeed in seducing even sages, as their extreme beauty comes with it the promise of sexual satiation. The very churning of the oceans itself occurred within Apas, as she is the principle of the water elements, and so all gods and goddesses of satiation are born from the mother of satiation herself, the oceans or Apas. Understanding this relationship that goddesses Apas has with cows, elephants, and wish fulfillments, we can see a relationship between goddess Apas and goddess Lakshmi as they both relate to ultimate gratification of all desires. Actually, many of the above gods and goddesses that were born from the churning of the oceans are seen as very similar to one another. Consider the following. The mantra of both the goddess Lakshmi and Chandra is the same, Shreem. Shreem is used to invoke both of these gods, suggesting of course that fundamentally they are one and the same. And in fact, many hymns to goddess Lakshmi refer to her as the full moon, richly glowing with an abundance of milk that rains upon the earth. Interestingly, both the moon and goddess Lakshmi are referred to as Kamadhenu, the wish-fulfilling cow, in their separate hymns. Chandra is also depicted in the Puranas as a very seductive planet, and the Apsaras themselves are highly seductive. And the key element of seduction is indeed that promise of satiation, that promise that a kiss from our object of affection can ease our principal animal craving, which is sex and romance. So as we can see, all the gods born of the churning of the oceans are at a base level kin. They are related to one another like siblings born of the same mother, in this case born of Apas, which is the ocean itself. And all these gods relate to the concept of satiation in one sense or another. Now, it is important to separate a god of pleasure versus a demonic entity of pleasure. The ultimate objective of every god is to pull the individual higher and relax his attachment to the material plane. But demonic forces do the opposite. They increase your connection to the material plane and have you obsessively bound to it. Whereas a god or goddess of pleasure and wealth wishes to bring you to a point of satiation such that you let go of materiality, a demon of pleasure will offer seawater to quench your thirst, and in so doing make you even more thirsty until you sink deeper into the ocean of samsara, trapped by vices. And this offers us one interpretation of Rahu in Purva Ashadha. Since Rahu is a planet that relates to confusion, and so the individual is inclined to foolishly go about the significations of the Rahu placement. A Rahu in Purva Ashadha will not distinguish between the source of desires that are worth attempting to satiate and the ones that are better off renounced, and can even lead an individual to acquire bottomless cravings that can never truly be satiated, like a craving for drugs, for example. So, Purva Ashadha is connected to all these gods and goddesses of both wish fulfillments and satiation, and also occurring within Sagittarius, the sign that begins our spiritual journey, helps us understand that respecting our carnal desires and even seeking to satisfy them is not in and of itself an evil thing. Again, if one's objective is to practice a detachment from the material plane, there are various means of achieving this, but the methods of Purva Ashadha, the methods of Mother Lakshmi, Mother Kamala, Lord Chandra, the methods of goddess Apas, for once again, when an individual has eaten his favorite meal and is full, he reclines into satiation, and without struggle, he turns away any new plate of food that is brought towards him. This state facilitates his journey into the spiritual worlds, without pain, without resentments, without longing for a taste of what he never had. Those who progress into more difficult forms of spirituality, still with unresolved cravings, are that much more likely to suffer severely. Let us consider this in the context of the Apsaras. So, the Apsaras are also born of the churning of Apas, the churning of the oceans, suggesting a natural kinship between themselves and the other gods born of this, like Chandra and Lakshmi. The term apsaras, of course, contains the up syllable that relates to appas. The apsaras are heavenly nymphs that are generally thought of as the most beautiful creatures in existence, and they function as Lord Indra's main weapon against the pious and ascetic sages. And in Hinduism, sages are believed to be even more powerful than gods themselves. Whenever a sage engaged in rigorous spiritual activities, it could be of such a force that it literally destabilized all the planes. And a sage's accumulation of power threatened to shake Lord Indra from his place as king of the heavens. Naturally, Lord Indra would feel the need to retaliate, but defeating a sage was nearly impossible. Sages, of course, were meant to be a class of individuals that have totally destroyed any units of carnality within them, and so experienced no fear, no anxiety, no anger, and presumably no lust. But actually, this is not totally true, for even sages still possess the seeds of all these tendencies. For a truly ascetic sage, it would take the most tantalizing, most seductive, most sexually exciting, most beautiful creatures to cause those very same seeds of lust to not only germinate once again, but also blossom into burning bloom. The apsaras were such creatures. The apsaras would sneak up on a sage, dance before him, and perform utter seductive acts, and, as if having lost control of himself, the sage would leap into sexual intercourse with the apsaras, effectively losing his spiritual merits in the process. These apsaras provoked the very same desires that they later satiated within the sage. It's interesting that Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter and is related to our initial steps towards spirituality, and yet Purva Ashadha itself also relates to that treacherous path of the apsaras. So on the positive side, Purva Ashadha is the defeat of sensuality through sensuality, with such goddesses as Lakshmi, but also on a negative side, it is the defeat of spirituality through sensuality, with such entities as the apsaras. So we witness also on a personality level that some Purva Ashadha natives see the value of sensuality and how it can actually progress one spiritually. But on the opposite side of the coin, we can see Purva Ashadha natives that totally look down upon and scorn sensuality, believing it to be wicked and evil, and are fearful of ever being perverted by it. We see on one end of the spectrum many Purva Ashadha natives that can become even hedonistic, owing to their exalting of sensual gratification as the ultimate good. But we also see on the opposite end many Purva Ashadha natives that find the mundane carnal world to be totally superficial and then proceed to judge severely anyone who allows themselves to be deceived and then overwhelmed by sense gratification. Owing to its relationship to the water element, Purva Ashadha also has dominion over the sacral chakra, suggesting a natural understanding of polarity as well as the Taoist concepts of yin and yang, which gives Purva Ashadha natives a natural understanding of matters of sex and romance. Finally, Purva Ashadha strongly connects to alchemy and to the practice of Tantra, as these are spiritual schools that seek to combine both sensuality and spirituality, both the material and the celestial. It is commonly believed that the one is against the other, but Purva Ashadha helps us understand how to intelligently make use of carnality to inch us closer into the divine. Before we begin with the personality section, please subscribe to my Patreon for many more interesting and original articles and insights into astrology, where I have other articles that also speak of Purva Ashadha. Also, please purchase my first astrology book, Sex and the Stars, which is a book on compatibility that looks at every single nakshatra and the relationship it has with the other. All my work is affordable, and by supporting me, you make producing even more work possible. Purva Ashadha natives often feel tugged between the devas and the asuras, pulled apart by spiritual aspirations and material cravings. They may partake of material pleasures, but at the same time feel bad or guilty for being so materialistic. Though they may enjoy material pursuits, many of the natives may try to somehow make their manner of indulgence and sensuality somehow morally superior to the manner of sensuality of the common person. If they enjoy designer brands, for instance, they may prefer brands that are very expensive and luxurious, but lesser known and obscure, and then try to make it seem as though this makes them less superficial than those who purchase brands like Gucci or Louis Vuitton, accusing others of the superficiality of which they themselves are guilty. Or they could do something like only buy a certain type of health food from expensive stores and then have that be their form of indulgence, and then in little ways put others down for enjoying more common meals. Although they may appreciate the health aspect of the expensive foods that they purchase, they also secretly enjoy the fact of their being expensive, and they conceal their desire to indulge themselves in such things behind health reasons. In general, there is a category of the natives that tries to attach morality to aesthetics, in an attempt to make their manner of gratification seem more ethical and less carnal and superficial. But on the other hand, they may be completely given over to sensuality and even construct entire philosophies based on hedonism, owing again to the symbolism of satiation. Purva Ashadha, along with Purva Palguni, may be the sorts to never hold themselves back from partaking of any and every carnal craving. One of the emotions of the water element is disgust. As it is very much concerned with purity and is fearful of being sullied through unfavorable mixtures, which often translates as Purva Ashadha natives being highly selective regarding their associations, even being accused of being stuck up by many for only making friends with certain types of individuals. This selectivity is also observed within Shatabisha Nakshatra, but in a different way. They tend to be highly persuasive, not only owing to their Sagittarian nature, but indeed the general allure of the water elements and its silent summoning powers, its ability to call others towards itself, its magnetism. In various interpretations of apas and the water principle in Hinduism, it is often stressed how all creatures, from plants to animals to humans, are all drawn to water, which speaks to not only its alluring power, but the general strength through associations of this nakshatra. Relating, of course, to its connection to the Apsaras, Purva Ashadha natives also are fascinated with the art and science of seduction, and this too is influenced by its knowledge base, the sacral chakra or the Svadhisthana chakra. There are other nakshatras that are known for seduction like Rohini and Aslesha, but these two nakshatras are more so naturally seductive without too much study. The actual study of polarity, the actual study of sexual dynamics, the actual study of the arts of seduction relate to Purva Ashadha. These natives understand the natural play of the masculine and the feminine. They understand the softness that exists within the apparent roughness in masculinity, but they also understand the hunger and terror that exists within the apparent gentleness of femininity, and also how to satisfy these various tendencies. They make great masculinity and femininity coaches, for instance. Purva Ashadha men may become teachers of masculinity for men, teaching men how to become more polarized into yang and masculinity, and even teaching them the truth of female nature. The women of Purva Ashadha would do the exact opposite, helping women come to terms with the inherent ferocity of their own sexuality and also how to seduce men. They also enjoy learning about sex and the science of sex, the art of sex, and the alchemy of sex, not only for purposes of sensual gratification, but also how to manipulate these energies for creative and spiritual purposes. One of the symbols of Purva Ashadha is the beautifully ornamented, handheld fan that half conceals the face. One can interpret this half-concealed face as one of a blushing damsel, and so this again relates Purva Ashadha to seduction and to mystery. But this is not a fiery seduction. It is not a dirty or crude seduction. Instead, it is a seduction that on the surface appears coy, on the surface appears shy, on the surface appears demure, but it conceals much conspiracy as the damsel with the fan is conscious of her alluring abilities. By concealing the face, this symbolism suggests that the principal way that the Purva Ashadha native seeks to seduce and pull others towards it is not by means of physical beauty, but by other more indirect and less carnal means like charm and wits, as well as glamour and mystery. So this speaks to the natural magnetism of this nakshatra, as these natives do not depend on looks alone to captivate others. Instead, they make use of much glamour and mystery to pull others towards itself. Mysterious individuals invite much curiosity and speculation, as many wish to poke behind the fan to see them in full. Now it becomes relevant to discuss the difference between charisma and magnetism. Now, the most charismatic nakshatra can easily be said to be the Nishta, whereas the most magnetic can easily be said to be Purva Ashadha. It can also be said that in terms of signs, Leo in general is charismatic, whereas the sign of Cancer is magnetic. But how are these two separate words defined, as they are often used interchangeably? Charisma is masculine and based on the sun and fire elements, as it is an obvious or apparent charm that entertains people. A charismatic individual may be funny and tell many jokes, may laugh loudly and smile broadly, and acts outwardly quite confident. On the other hand, magnetism is feminine and based on the moon and water elements. It is quiet, mysterious, and even with the individual not saying much or doing much, they still provoke a lot of curiosity in their environment, with many people wishing to get to know them and get close to them. Purva Ashadha natives like to cultivate very unique and interesting elements in their personality that not only fascinate, but indeed invite others to come close and observe them. Their way of speaking may be different and interesting. Their fashion style may have some odd or unique elements to it. They may even teach themselves a way of flipping their hair or pursing their lips, or even a way of walking that draws people in, as the water element and appas is always trying to draw others close to it. Though Purva Ashadha natives are of course capable of being physically beautiful, they understand that there is much about an individual that makes him or her charming or attractive, and often looks alone may not move people. So, Purva Ashadha natives have a natural understanding of polarity because the Svadhisthana chakra relates to polarity. They understand the truth of attraction, the truth of male and female sexuality. They understand the truth of human carnality and human desire that is often concealed from civilized perception. Purva Ashadha men, for example, are very in tune to the truth of female sexuality and are not deceived by the performance of coyness and meekness that women put on that actually belie their very aggressive and discriminatory preferences. Relating again to the Apsaras, Purva Ashadha natives, both women and men, tend to be very fascinated by the sort of romantic pursuits that are resistant to their charms. It is almost as if, as a means of proving to themselves their own ability, they specifically target people that are often thought of as hard to get or out of their league, very much like an apsara trying to seduce a stubborn sage. Indeed, both the men and women of Purva Ashadha are fascinated with romantic partners that are quote-unquote out of their league, as they are highly sexually competitive. But when you chase such highly desired partners, naturally the desire to ferociously protect your union arises, and this accounts for much of their aggressiveness. The sexually competitive nature of Purva Ashadha also helps us understand one reason why this nakshatra cares so much about being unique, as a unique personality or unique charm is one way of competing in the sexual market and achieving and securing romantic partners. For example, there are studies that show that in an environment where most men have beards, it is the few men who are clean-shaven that are the most preferred by women, as this becomes a unique and interesting characteristic that pulls the eye and draws one's attention. Likewise, in an environment where most men are clean-shaven, it is the few men who have beards that are seen as the most attractive, as they once again make themselves distinct. Indeed, Purva Ashadha is also a nakshatra that relates to war, but it is also a nakshatra that relates to femininity, owing to its watery nature. So how does the feminine principle go about war with others? Simple, by having others fight their battles for them. The strength of Purva Ashadha is in its associations, and it tries its best to select the most superior associations to strengthen itself, shunning those that are weak. A common Purva Ashadha strategy whenever they have an enemy is to play damsel in distress, over-victimizing themselves and pretending to be weak so as to inspire virility among those around her, so that they are energized with enough rage to fight the Purva Ashadha natives' battles, while the Purva Ashadha native themselves reclines and watches from a safe distance as everyone else destroys her enemies for her. This is one reason Purva Ashadha natives may sometimes be concerned with being very popular and being very well liked, so as to better tug on the heartstrings of those around her. Though this nakshatra can have elitist tendencies, it is actually a very easy nakshatra to like. In fact, it is arguably the easiest nakshatra to like, and oftentimes other people tend to like the Purva Ashadha natives with very little effort on their parts. A Purva Ashadha native could be new to a social setting, but quickly people will be drawn to them, very much like how creatures are drawn to rivers and lakes. The Purva Ashadha native could contribute very little to the social dynamics, speaking less often than the other members, and yet the other members still feel as though they are an integral part of the group. Despite the central significations of this nakshatra, owing to its rulership of Jupiter, Purva Ashadha natives actually tend to do a good job of resisting the influence of most sensual experiences, as most things are common and mundane to them. Only the most extreme and exquisite sensual experiences are enough to move them, as such experiences are apsaric, if you will. Very much like how it takes a beauty and a charm of the level of an apsara to truly move a sage. So these natives are usually not impressed or swayed by most experiences, but seek the most exalted experiences, as these are the only ones that have any effect on them.